Hello, everybody. You should see that we're live this first evening on YouTube. We've got a really good installment of talks for you. We're going to probably give you about 3 minutes before we start, just so we can allow you to get settled, and then we can start the process and the talks, and hopefully we're going to have a good one this evening. Right. Okay. Let's get started. So I'll quickly do the intro, and then we can get on to the 3 speakers who I'm sure you want to hear instead of me. So welcome everybody to the 49th Agile Roundabout. Can't believe we've done 49 of these, and this is our 5th virtual event. I'd like to thank you all in the audience for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for these talks. And obviously without you guys, these communities wouldn't be what they are today. So today we're going to be delving into the often complex topic of agile transformations, and in a sense it's going to be a really interesting one, and we've got some great discussions lined up. So to help us navigate through this particular topic, we have 3 amazing speakers lined up. So firstly, we're going to be hearing from Shabir, who's a delivery lead at The Economist. Then we're going to be hearing from Roland, who's the tech lead at Fluidly, and then finally we'll be hearing from Mark, who's an agile coach at GM Agile. So at TRG, we focus on tech recruitment. However, we've set up these talks as a way to give back to the tech community, and we hope that you guys in the audience find real value in the content this evening. As you can probably tell, we've now got a new platform and streaming via YouTube. So all 3 speakers would love your participation and interaction. So if you've got any comments or questions, then obviously please use the chat function or the comment function to the right of the screen. Just as a side note there, you're going to have to use Google to log into that. And if you want to use any social media, please can you use the hashtag Agile Roundabout. So I'm sure you're fed up of hearing from me now, so I'd like to introduce Shabir, who's going to be taking us on a talk on what he perceives as being important in an agile transformation. So thank you very much, Shabir.
Great, thanks a lot, John. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So we'll dive straight into it. I'll give a very brief intro into who I am. So yes, my name is Shabir. I currently work as a delivery lead at The Economist. I've essentially worked in different delivery related roles for several years now, and I've been fortunate, or maybe some might think unfortunate, to have been involved in a lot of transformations of one sort or another, and therefore I have some of the battle scars to share with everyone today. So that's what I'll be doing. So I'm going to dive straight into the talk. So I'm going to be covering a little bit of context to start with, just kind of when typically do companies attempt to scale up and go through some form of transformation, what happens during this scaling, and that's where we see a lot of these kind of the pitfalls. Certainly I've experienced a fair few. And the bulk of the time that I really want to spend on is talking about those specific pitfalls and some potential solutions that you yourselves, potentially as delivery people, as agile people, or even as people who are just passionate around agile and transformations, can try and do to kind of bring some form of semblance and kind of structure to the huge bits of chaos and what people might think as organized chaos that you often get with a transformation. And those themes are often around collaboration, communication, and actually agility. We say agile transformation, and often we end up going so far away from any form of agility that it doesn't look anything like what someone might think of as agile. So those are the things that I want to try and cover off in about 20 odd minutes. So just diving straight into this. Scaling. So when we want to scale up, there's usually a couple of causes for scaling up, a couple of reasons why typically a company would decide, right, we need to scale up, go through some form of transformation in order to achieve something. And usually the 2 reasons when you really dive into it are, one, there's an increase in demand. Maybe there's kind of more business needs. The business has been growing, which is a good thing, and therefore they want to deliver more things from a software perspective. Or there's an increase in complexity. I can certainly think of times during the course of my career where we've had to scale up just because we've had some complex things come our way. One of the ones that really kind of sticks in my mind is actually a regulatory one around GDPR. Just kind of when that first came, I'm sure a lot of people who had gone through software projects relating to that can understand the complexity that came along with that, and therefore the need to sometimes scale up just to even deal with that while you're still dealing with business as usual pieces of work. And often what we end up actually seeing when we go through some of this is an increase in numbers. Sure, we kind of increase our team sizes or structures. Maybe we can increase some of our statistics like so-called perceived productivity and output and so forth as a result of the scaling up. But often we end up losing that sense of culture and identity that our individuals and teams have. And also we end up losing some of that agility, the ability to actually being able to release iteratively in smaller chunks, get quicker customer feedback. And that's really kind of what I want to touch on as well today. Why is it required? Again, this is more for context purposes. Sometimes a company just simply has a new company direction. Maybe that comes from a change in leadership, a new owner of the company. I've actually been through a merger of two companies, which resulted in complete change of our leadership team, and therefore we decided to go down a bit of a tech overhaul. That's usually one of the things you often see. Or another one of the things that you often might see is there's a realization that actually our tech suite or solutions or whatever systems we have in place doesn't really meet the business needs, and therefore we need to go through some form of a re-platform or migration. And of course, maybe you might decide to do one or the other depending on which kind of context you're in. But this is typically the kind of two main reasons I've seen for either a tech overhaul or re-platform, and hence doing some form of transformation at the end of it as well. And what happens next? I'm sure hopefully you can comment in the box on YouTube as well if you can relate to this. I'm sure a lot of you people have seen this. Is typically we end up going through some form of analysis phase, and often when we're doing some of these transformation programs or projects, we end up getting some preferred consultant on board to help us with that. They assess what our today's state is, they assess what our desired future state is. There's some contract negotiations, of course, and then we are essentially predefining some development plan with hard release dates and milestones in place. And off we go, right? That sounds like a great recipe for success, or does it? What inevitably happens is, we need more people. So therefore we put a lot of hierarchy in place because it's required to organize all of that chaos. And don't forget, we're obviously enforcing team structures and ways of working. And often, I've often quizzed this to various people who have been involved in transformations or who are attempting to drive some form of transformation. The reason I'm often given is it's for consistency. And I'm not sure if I really have understood what that means yet, because I've not really seen much value in that consistency. Often we're actually taking away value from, teams being able to be autonomous, being able to be empowered in what they're working on and releasing, and actually providing value to the business. We often end up taking away from that, and hence why I've written over here, it results in a loss of that individual and team identity. So hence it's got that impact on culture. And also our work structure actually means we're probably losing some form of agility. We're actually not being able to be as agile as we would have liked. Right, so the pitfalls. I've got 8 pitfalls that I'm going to go through. These are things that I've experienced and seen, and I just want to talk through each one and hopefully give some suggestions on what you can do to try and get over that pitfall or try and avoid it completely. One is not consulting your existing teams. We often go through this transformation. We decide, right, let's bring in some experts because surely they're the ones who know how to do all of this before. And yes, that is true to some extent, but also we should really consult our teams because they have invaluable domain knowledge that anyone coming from the outside is not really going to be able to tell us about. They're going to either spend a lot of time, money, and effort finding out the same things that your people can already tell you. And therefore, it's really vital and valuable to actually consult your existing teams. ultimately, if you're looking at this more from a kind of program portfolio budgeting perspective as well, you can save on some cost there as well. Often you're using a lot of high paid consultants to do stuff and tell you stuff that really people that you already employ know and can already share with you. The second pitfall is planning for it all and trying to get certainty on releases. And a great quote, unfortunately, I don't know who said this at first, but you're essentially trying to plan for everything at a point in time where you know the least about that project, which is right at the beginning. And whenever I share this quote with anyone, they realize it, but I don't know if it fully lands. If you really think about it, you're essentially trying to put together often an end-to-end plan in quite often a waterfall fashion at a point in time where you've pretty much experienced nothing. You may have not even done a discovery phase. You're probably going to time box a discovery phase, and you're kind of hoping off the back of that discovery phase, you're going to have all or most of the answers that you can then plow through a whole development phase with, or go through some form of transformation. And it sounds pretty crazy that you're trying to do that and often work with a big budget to try and achieve this. Well, why not just use some planning increments? And I know this is a concept of SAFe. I'm actually not a fan of SAFe myself, but I do like the idea of this when you're dealing with complex programs, to get away from some of that waterfall methodology. It's just to plan in increments. Maybe an increment for yourselves can be a 2-month period, a 3-month period. Plan for that period, see what happens, learn from the feedback that you experience during that period, and then plan for the next one. And it's often something that I see a lot of programs and projects spend countless kind of man hours just putting together these end-to-end plans, which can literally change when one tiny thing happens, and then you're spending more hours essentially readjusting that plan. The next pitfall is kind of rapidly scaling in the hopes of faster delivery, and quite often we see the impacts for the company's culture happen here, and that's kind of what happens with the team. One of the things that I've never really seen done what I would consider to be in a correct manner is actually giving time to the teams for team bonding, for defining what their ways of working are, for defining what their communication methods are, for defining exactly how they are going to be working together. Quite often we end up scaling up, putting new people together or new teams together, and the time that they actually are given to bond is usually a sprint. So 2 weeks, and then you're expecting them to often work on these complex programs of work for the next year, 2 years or so. I think we really need to think about how much time we should be factoring in up front to allow the teams to bond and settle together. And at the end of the day, if you do this correctly up front, you're going to be saving on a lot of time later, which can often result in problems. If your team just isn't performing optimally, they're not able to communicate with each other. And this is probably more so important nowadays when we're all working remotely. If they haven't got that kind of seamless communication methods down and agreed upon, then often there's just going to be wasted time throughout the whole project, which will add up to a significant amount. And that's why I think this is a point where I've never really seen a complex program of work give the necessary time, in my opinion, right up front to focus on ways of working, agreed communication methods, and so forth. And of course, we all love a big bang release, right? One of the biggest pitfalls you see in some of these complex things is just a big bang approach, where there's just a transformation program just around ways of working, whether it's like a re-platforming migration sort of thing or whatever it might be. Any complex program often has some form of big bang approach to it. And actually, why can't we define what our first end-to-end vertical slice is to provide your customer value? That can even work if you're just thinking about changing your ways of working across an entire department or division. What is that end-to-end slice? So what can you work with, virtual teams or anything like that to provide your customer value and get a slice of your division working in an agile manner? At the end of the day, this will be able to de-risk your whole program, because you can prove it works in some smaller iteration, get feedback, take the learnings, and then move on to the next slice. And ultimately, you'll be able to deliver quicker as a result. If you're looking at releases as a result of this, you'll be able to get something out as a vertical slice first and then work on stuff iteratively after that. So number 5, forgetting your communities. And I see a lot of companies these days do have communities of practice. But I kind of feel they often turn into enforced talks by people with a rota that, you know, you must present something, and quite often it's pretty much the stuff that they've been working on. I think what you really need to help foster and grow is actually their passion for the technologies that they're involved in, and whatever the discipline they might be involved in. And the best examples I've often seen end up creating a really highly engaged, passionate community, which then ultimately not only benefits themselves, but also the others around them. It then becomes so much easier to onboard junior engineers, for example, just because they've got passionate people around them and they kind of feed off that passion and they can learn so much for their own skill sets. When you've got a strong kind of internal agile community as well, then often, you know, they're able to share some of their best practices, best ways of working, share their experiences that they've had. And especially if you're going through some form of transformation, I think it's extremely important not to forget your communities, just because they are a very passionate kind of pool of people. At the end of the day, they really enjoy what they're doing. They love the tech and whatever it is that they work on. Forgetting about your communities is a really big mistake, because at the end of the day, it can really hurt your culture at the company. Pitfall number 6. So only the higher ups can hire. I've started to see this as a bit of a trend recently, and I'm not sure if it's a tactic to just save on time that the team might get involved, might see as being a draining factor or something else. But I've started seeing a lot of managers or people even away from a team are the ones who are responsible for hiring. So if there's like an engineering lead, for example, they're the ones who are the only people involved in a recruitment process. And obviously that's not right if you think about it. At the end of the day, you want to have a team somewhat being involved at the very least in that recruitment process. At the end of the day, a person is going to be hired for that team. They're the ones who are going to know what that best fit is for the team, not someone who doesn't work with that team day in and day out. And I've seen some good examples at the same time of this, where essentially a team is fully empowered, they're fully involved in the recruitment process, all the way from CV checks all the way to that final interview stage, and they're the ones who are actually making the decision. So if a team themselves and the people involved in that recruitment process, they're the ones who say, yes, that person's a good fit for us, then often the company will support them in that decision and hire that person as well. And it feels like an obvious thing to say, but it's extremely invaluable for the team to maintain, you know, what subculture they might have within that team, especially if they are given that empowerment and autonomy to hire people for their own teams. And pitfall number 7, you know, us being in some form of agile or delivery roles, we all love a bit of reporting at the end of the day. I feel reporting is a double-edged sword, and I see value in it, but I also see the waste in it as well, depending on how you're doing it. I think too much often results in a waste of time. You should always be asking yourself, who's reading this at the end of the day? What is it that they actually want to know, rather than me just spending hours and hours producing reports on projects and providing fancy graphs and charts and numbers? What is it that they actually need to know? And let me figure out what is the best way of providing that information for them. I think there is an aspect of providing too little reporting can result in a bit of lack of confidence, just because there's no visibility there. And I think we should always encourage transparency. We don't want to have people in the business, or whether they're kind of like senior leadership team or whether it's our actual business stakeholders, thinking something's being hidden from them. I don't think that should be the case. I think there's a balance that basically needs to be found. And some of the best ways that I usually find of reporting stuff was trying to automate it. So really understanding what is the data or report or something that a business stakeholder or a senior leadership member might need, and then seeing, can we automate that? Are there some dashboards we can provide? I've even mentioned roadmaps in Jira, you know, for our business stakeholders. Do they just want to understand our progress? Because maybe from their perspective, they've got a huge budget to play with. They'd like to know when we can release a product, and therefore they want to know when they can really start planning in some marketing spend and start lining up some agencies to work with. So I think there's definitely clever ways of doing reporting. There's definitely a balance. We don't want to do too much. We don't want to do too little, but we do want to find out what is the value that we want to be given with those bits of reporting. And the last one, and luckily I do have a bit of time to talk through this, but that's no time. let's not go through a transformation program project or do some big migration thing or re-platform thing or tech overhaul and then not give our engineers some self-development time or innovation time, or letting teams bond through whatever it is that they like to bond over. Maybe they like to have coffees at 11 a.m. after they've done their stand-up. Maybe they like to go on team lunches, and that takes 20 minutes longer, once every couple of weeks. Let's give them that time. At the end of the day, keeping that team together, keeping that team bonded, keeping them motivated is the thing that's really going to drive success. It's not going to be taking away these important bits of valuable time that they use for these items. Because that's probably how you're going to lose your best engineers at the end of the day. These are the things that keeps them motivated, going, engaged, and enjoying working with each other to develop great solutions. So taking away from this is not going to help you at all. And that's probably it.
Thank you, Shabir. It was really, really interesting to hear some of the common pitfalls and how you've navigated through those in the past. We've got our other two speakers who I'm sure may have questions for you, but just from the comments, we've got Neil who's asked what were the deciding factors on how you split the teams for upscaling, and were they consultants, were they recommended, or were they your own?
Depends where, because I've worked in a few different places having done similar things, and it's been a mix. Sometimes it has been consultant led, and that's often where that's happened. It's usually been because there's been the leadership team have brought in consultants that they've kind of tried and tested in the past, and therefore there's a strong trust element with that consultant partner, and therefore they wanted to go down that route because they felt that that's the thing that's going to achieve the goals that they had in mind. In other places, I've definitely worked with teams who have been able to provide suggestions and actually help shape the teams as they feel. So actually we've consulted people internally to the company, and they're the ones who have actually given the suggestions in terms of, right, we think we need to scale up in these areas. Actually, we should break off that team into a sub team, use them to work on product XYZ and scale up in that manner. So actually it's been a mix of the two, to be honest with you.
Okay. We've got another question from Andy who asks, do you share all these pitfalls in advance with the teams when you start on new transformations?
So it depends on how the transformation is being kind of put together and structured. The best way I try to share these is through a formal RAID log. So actually defining these in issues and risks, just because that's the language that essentially we're talking with when we're talking about our senior leadership team and management teams. So trying to formulate these risks within the context of the company that you're working with, and putting them into whatever format they have to portray issues and risks. That's often the best way, and that's often how I've done it in the past as well.
Okay. And just before we move on to Roland, I was just wanting to ask if Roland or Mark had a question for Shabir in regards to his talk.
I guess when I've been in companies before, I like the reporting stack sort of kind of chimes with me, because I've been in places where I've been asked for reporting on QA metrics, and it seems like it's come from like someone high up, you don't know where. And I guess, have you seen lots of wasteful reporting in your time?
Absolutely, yeah. I've spent hours on doing reports from random people who have requested it for reasons unknown to me. And often when I've asked for why, one of the answers I often get is, it's always been done like that. So they're not actually able to tell me what they want to get out from that data or report. It's just, that's always how it's been done. And actually, I've had some good wins where if you actually talk to a lot of these, a lot of our stakeholders, essentially from a reporting perspective, and actually try really get to the bottom and collaborate with them on what they want, I've actually managed to eliminate some reports completely in my career, and that's been a great win. And then we've created like very relevant, lightweight dashboards that give them exactly what they really want and what provides them actual value, rather than just providing pages of reports and numbers and metrics just because that's how it's been done in the past.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's difficult to sort of push back on these things for sure.
Yeah, I think it's collaboration. Just collaborate with your stakeholder, try to figure out what it is that they really need.
Yeah.
And finally, Mark, do you have anything you'd like to add or ask in regards to Shabir's talk?
Yeah, absolutely, Shabir. You mentioned making sure you give the teams time, and frankly, I couldn't agree more with that. But how have you found that you get around that? How have you found you're able to do that, giving them time for learning, development, adaptation, etc.?
We try to set the tone right from the get-go, so we make sure that we bake those things into our sprints. So we say 20% of our time, and often that might be like a Friday afternoon or something like that, and some other time elsewhere is if we're doing it per week, it might be something like that, or per sprint, whatever it might be. We'll block out some time and say that is your self-development time. We then set some internal quarterly goals for our team to say, right, in the next quarter, let's have a hackathon, because we haven't had one for the last 2 years. So let's actually make it one of our goals for our team to have an hackathon. It'd be great if we can get some other teams on board as well, but if we can even do it within our team, I think that's at least a win to start with. And then other things like, let's make sure we kind of go for team lunch every so often. Obviously, that's difficult in this day and age. We actually have virtual coffees every Friday with the team I currently work with in the morning, and that's really helped a lot. We just talk about random topics and what's going on in the world these days, and that's really helped, learn things about the team that none of us would have known about otherwise.
That's a great idea. The team I'm currently working in have just instigated that, and our first one is tomorrow, which we're really looking
Fantastic.
forward to. So, yeah, great call. Nice one.
Nice.
Thanks, Mark. And we've just got one more question. I think we can squeeze in from the comments. So David asks, any thoughts on how you can tailor approaches in the current remote environment?
I think it's even more important for those team things now in the current environment we're in than before. So I think really trying to go out of your way to do whatever you can for team bonding, virtual workshops, if that's what you need, spending a bit more time doing, discovery phases and stuff like that, if that's what you need. Really identifying what you can do and what you can do to bring the team together and talking more, collaborating more. I think that's just even more important now than it has been in the past.
Thank you very much, Shabir. Much appreciated. A really, really interesting talk, especially hearing how you've been overcoming those pitfalls and obviously identifying those pitfalls in the first place. So I'm sure the audience will find great value in what you've been saying as well. So up next, we've got Roland, who's going to be taking us through quite an interesting talk. I'm looking forward to this one and hearing about it. So further ado, Roland, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, John. So today I'm going to be talking about mono environments and the joys of working within them. I'm not sure if anyone's really heard about what a mono environment actually is, but basically a mono environment is where you have one environment and that's production. Basically, that means no staging and no QA. So just a little bit of context first. So who are we? I work at a company called Fluidly, which was founded in 2016. So we just celebrated our 4th birthday around about 4 weeks ago. And what we do is we provide a forecasting platform and a funding options platform for SMEs. So tends to be the SMEs or people who run SMEs struggle with cash flow, and it does keep them up at night. And so what we're trying to do is to solve that problem through allowing them to see into the future what their cash position might be at any given point in time. So in terms of the engineering team, there's 12 of us at the current moment, and it's split into 2 squads. One works on the funding journey, and then another one, which is the one I work on, deals with the funding engine. So back when I joined the company, it was just before embarking on a platform rebuild. And when I turned up, it was basically a monolith. It was extremely hard to work on. So I'll just go into some of the problems that we experienced. And I'm sure you recognize a lot of these. So as an example, we had a brittle platform. So we're having issues constantly happening in production, always a fire somewhere to be put out. There are slow load times, especially on the forecast. There's a lot of data to compile together to make it happen. And so this was just not really working very well. Point number 2, unstable build. Again, something that plagues a lot of organizations, and I've been through quite a few. In this particular instance, it was 25 minutes around about, if I remember correctly, to get through, which is not the worst, but it's not the best either. But as usual, there was no guarantees that when you actually try to get something through CI that it would fail for the right reasons. So it's extremely frustrating. Obviously, when things are built in a hurry, they become complex very quickly. And so, yeah, the code base and infrastructure just become unwieldy and very difficult to work with. And if you wanted to configure a development environment, it was quite challenging. It did take me a while to get up and running when I first turned up. But ultimately, you know, this has an impact on the business. So if you're trying to forge a new market segment, intelligent cash flow, then you're trying to be the innovator and you want to stay ahead of the competition. So you want to be able to release quickly and with good quality, and this is something we just weren't able to do. So moving on to the mono environment stuff. So when I was writing this talk up, it was kind of becoming clear that what I'm talking about is not particularly new or novel. But the thing that we do very well is that we apply these principles quite rigidly. We obviously will learn and evolve, but we really, really take them seriously, all the processes that we've put in place. And so when someone tells you, oh, I'm going to merge straight to production with no QA and no staging, the reaction is, this is mental. And I remember first hearing about this approach back in 2013. I heard about a company that was doing payments, and it was said that they would just monitor what was going on in production. If it looked as though something wasn't working, they would just roll back. And this is, you know, sort of, it was quite an interesting idea. But from the learnings that we've had in the last year and a half, one thing I would strongly suggest you don't do is to try and do this on a monolith or on a brownfield project. It's likely to land yourself with a P45, so definitely don't do that. But if you're in a greenfield situation where you're building a microservice from scratch in a large organization, by all means, do go for it. Try it in a low-risk area, like a non-critical path, so you can make the easy mistakes. And then once you've learned those mistakes, then you can sort of roll it out a bit further. So on the subject of craziness, is this not crazy as well? When you consider the fact that it can take you up to 2 weeks sometimes to get things into production, you could be building up a whole bunch of changes across lots of different features being built at once, and then it's one big bang. And there will be a dependency, well, lots of dependencies and destructive changes that go along with that you really cannot recover from. So that might be database migrations or infrastructural changes that need to support the code. So this makes things quite hard to roll back from. Oops, sorry, gone a bit too far. And yeah, sometimes you do get through the entire process, and yeah, production just breaks. You know, you've got migration failures, so the migration works absolutely fine in CI. But then your production traffic is locking up your database, and I've experienced this firsthand, and it's very difficult to diagnose. And so you get surprised, and if you've waited 2 weeks for this to roll out, the chances are it's a little bit too late. You kind of already lost a lot of context. So there's multiple reasons why this kind of thing can happen as well, that production behaves differently to your staging and QA environments. So if you don't have a QA and staging environment, then, and you're going straight to production, then there is a trade-off to be made. So I'm accepting that I haven't got the safety net anymore of a QA and staging environment. But what I do get in return is I can now get into production quickly. And if the goal is to discover product market fit, as it is for us, then getting to production quickly gives us the best chance of doing that. And also the time that we're saving by not maintaining QA in a staging environment allows us to invest in the production environment. So that means that we can invest in really good monitoring, delivery of more features, dealing with tech debt, all of these great things that we wish we could do, but unfortunately we've got to keep staging QA running. So anyways, if you're going into production straight away, then you will need some risk mitigation strategies nailed down. So the broad categories of risk mitigation here are TDD and pair programming. I don't need to say anything about this just yet. Reducing the blast radius, roughly translated, means making smaller merges, not just doing huge pieces of work and merging all at once. Feature flagging, so developing features without the customer even knowing they're there. Monitoring alerting, if things do go wrong, let me know as soon as possible. And post-mortem, so in the event that the monitoring alerting didn't save me and our customers have basically experienced the issues before we knew about them, then I'd like to learn from that through a post-mortem. And production smoke test, which goes hand in hand with monitoring and alerting. So taking a bit of a deeper dive into the testing aspect. So a lot of people talk about TDD and unit testing in particular, and they sort of test a lot of implementation details, but we take a very different view that we test outside in. We're really trying to get testing of the behavior rather than implementation details. And so for us, what that means is in the front end that we do the large bulk of tests with React Testing Library and Jest, and we don't really test all the internals. We interact with form components, click buttons, and mock an API, and then watch what happens to the page and how it behaves. If it's an API, then you would basically be hitting at the HTTP level, and you'll be hooking it up to a real database to see how the database is interacting as well. So we're pretty much trying to involve as much of the stack as possible. Unfortunately, I can't really go into the massive detail because it would just take too long. It's a different talk altogether. But what this does allow us to do is to fearlessly refactor as well. So if I wanted to change the internals for whatever reason, and then it allows me to do so because I'm not changing any behavior and the tests are focused on the behavior. So this is a really advantageous way to do your testing. With the testing as well, the tests need to quickly execute. So in our particular situation, right now, our tests take under 5 minutes, if I remember correctly. And what this enables is a rapid deployment for features and bug fixing. And the other situation where this becomes extremely handy is that sometimes you're in a very pressured situation where you've got a production issue that needs resolving extremely quickly, and you don't want to be in a state where you've got 25 minutes of tests to run through and you just have to skip them just to fix a bug. So the other thing we really care about is that the tests need to be reliable. So in a lot of organizations I've been in, there is a tolerance for flaky tests in the build and the temptation to just rerun over and over again. Whereas what we just decided to do is we just decommission that test for a period of time and try and fix it and then recommission it in the build later. So basically we can still get all of our test coverage for every single merge to master and then subsequent deployment. And so also when we're doing local development, we connect to the production services, which almost constitutes very closely testing in real life on production. So when we first built the front end, we were wondering how we were going to sort of, see how it worked and behaved. And our CTO said, well, why don't you just connect it to production? And we couldn't really get our heads around it. But then once we did it, it just worked. And it's got to the point now where people are able to merge and have a very high confidence level that what you're doing on your local machine is exactly the same as what happens when you actually deploy it on the environment. So this is extremely advantageous in that regard. And then also for product reviews and manual testing, we actually can do this in production behind a feature flag as well. And then once we're ready for it to be rolled out to customers, the only thing that changes is a configuration flag managed by a third party, which is launched darkly in our particular instance. So now that I've covered a bit of testing, sometimes your testing isn't good enough. So what we're hoping is that the blast radius has been reduced. So thirdly, it's more or less, if you've built it, then you've got to own the whole thing right to deployment. So that means your DevOps team is an enabler here. They're not really a crutch to your development team anymore. They're just giving you the tools that you need to bring up all of your infrastructure in a simple and quick manner. And that way we're not throwing things over the wall to them and then they come back to us like, swearing and saying this code is rubbish and it doesn't work. At the end of the day, I'm going to own whatever I put out into production. So basically, I'm going to be considering risk for every change, and all the past experience and post-mortems that I'll talk about in a bit play a large part in understanding what the risks are. So I'll touch a little bit about feature flags as well. We're going to be releasing tens of times a day, and the user will be completely unaware of what's going on. And even if we make a mistake in that code, the user still should be unaware. So yeah, once the feature is out, we can remove the flag, and then that's all good. The code's nice and clean again. Merging small and often. This is something that everyone wants to do, but when you've got long builds, it's kind of it puts you off doing that. But when your builds are solid and quick, we can do this. So it lowers the risk of breaking production in effect, and it gives us an opportunity to roll back easily. So if the changes are small, then the likelihood is if I do a revert commit, then I'm not going to end up with lots of conflicts, and those are also prone to error. So merging small, merging often is definitely a very good habit to get into, and working in a mono environment and having a good build enables this. If we're doing a high risk change, which sometimes you just can't avoid, then you want to be pairing. I mean, we pair anyway 90% of the time, but high risk changes, you just need to pair. It's as simple as that. And at least then you're having a discussion. You're talking about preventative measures that can be taken and what might happen. And it also just helps with the blame-free and stress-free culture. Obviously, if you're deploying something that's high risk, the stress being all on one person is probably not great for mental health. And obviously, just asking the question of yourself all the time, can I easily roll back? Can I just create a PR, or is it a destructive change? In which case, I might need to think about rolling forward. Just understand the risks, and then as we make more mistakes, we just get a bit better with time. So if we haven't been able to reduce the blast radius, and our customers have experienced an outage for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it might be, then we'll run a post-mortem. And basically the idea is to examine the fallout of a change that's been made and then the events that led up to it. And what we're trying to do is to find a root cause of the problem and address it. So in order to make this effective, the best thing to do is, obviously you will stabilize production as your first step. I mean, we don't want to leave it broken. But as soon as that's been done, the next thing that's probably best to do is to actually write the post-mortem. And so this way we're going to get as much detail and context at the time at which the event happened. After a week, you would have gotten too much. So it's best to just get it done straight away. And this just enables a good discussion. And it'll be written, obviously, by the engineers who coded and deployed the change. And the key part of this document is a timeline. And the timeline basically will trace back a lot further than you expect it will. So it's not just about the first commit necessarily for that change. There might be a motivation or an original motivation for why a change was made or a feature was made. So as an example of that, like I deployed a change recently which broke two-factor authentication for Australian users. But the timeline goes all the way back to January when we got an email from Xero basically saying that we had to apply this on our site. Otherwise, they were going to turn it off for Australian users. So it's a regulatory requirement. And so by doing this, we're able to observe all of the events and decisions that got made and then trace back to the root cause of an issue and then see how we can stop these things from happening a second time around. If we cannot address the root cause of an issue, perhaps, sometimes these are just human errors and it does happen. During lockdown, I broke production at least 3 or 4 times in a month. Then we just need to say, okay, well, can we reduce the severity? Have we got enough monitoring and alerting in place? Is our monitoring and alerting tight enough? We want a tight feedback loop when issues do occur. So, we can sort of make these changes as well and recommend them. And also, just point out the things that went well as well. So, we want to learn from failures, but also, what's going well for us and really sort of like double down on it as well. So, we're helping to sort of, create a blame-free culture. This is really important on the post-mortem. Someone is putting themselves out there, being extremely vulnerable. And so just make it a blame-free session if you are going to use these. So moving on to alerting and monitoring, as I've touched on. If you're deploying code, then monitoring and alerting is part of that. You have to do it because you need to be able to see what's going on. So this means dashboards all over the place. And if I've got dashboards, then when I'm deploying code and it's going out in 10 minutes, I can see in real time what's happening. So this is really, really useful to have, just so that you can just roll back as soon as you notice that something's going wrong and have a look and then try again. So if you've got alerts that are going off, my recommendation on a mono environment is, or any environment for that matter, is to basically make sure that the alerts are, because a user will be seeing something. Because obviously if you're getting alerts at 2 a.m. because memory is getting a bit high on a database, that could be a false alarm, but you're going to have an angry engineer. So use the CPU and memory usage type diagnostics, all the technical diagnostics, just to sort of like help you investigate, but not to really alert on. Finally, automated production testing is something we're doing, maybe not as much as we should, but it's something we could definitely get better at. So in effect, synthetics is kind of what most people call this. It's just periodic tests to make sure the production environment is up and running all the time. And so if users rely on your system, then these checks are important to run. And if you've got critical behavior, i.e. logins, test it every minute. If it's something, a feature that's very deep down, maybe you don't need to test it quite as regularly. You do have third-party providers that do provide this functionality. We didn't do it just because, you know, it costs too much, but it doesn't have to be complicated. It can just be a cron job linked to an alert system, and that's probably about the extent of it, right? And yeah, again, as with any testing, reliability above all else. Make sure that your production tests, when they do fail, are failing because something's gone wrong. It's just, you know, you just want to have happy, productive teams that have slept well. So yeah. Keep the alerts, you know, sort of reliable, so that they're not noisy. So assume that all of this has gone well and you're kind of, you know, you've got a mono environment set up and you're not breaking production 4 times a month like I have in one particular point in time. What's the outcome you get? So we have an amazing ability to sort of get a really speedy build and a lot of test coverage. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got high quality test tests, and there's 2,000 of them currently. And this means that a large portion of the front end is tested in less than 5 minutes, and it really does test actual behavior the user would see. So we're really covering lots of edge cases, happy cases, sad cases. And this is the sort of thing that in other organizations are covered by Selenium and Cypress, and unfortunately that's not something that scales. So we do have browser tests, but there's only 25 of them, and that takes about 2.5 minutes. So for me, this is a massive win, and it's something I've never really seen done before. And when you do talk to people about that you can do this, they kind of shake their heads and say it's not possible, but I think we proved that we can do it. And yeah, the entire build is done in less than 10 minutes. But this is like after a whole bunch of features that have already been written. I think we could probably get this down to less than 5 minutes again at some point in time, but you know, right now this is serving our purposes. The other thing is also, as I've mentioned earlier, about keeping the build stable. So this is, I think, a stream of builds over the course of a day on our front end, which is normally the most flaky build of any system that you're doing and running CI on. And so, yeah, the actual only failure in this list is a production smoke test going off. So yeah, again, something that you rarely see in organizations, I think, is a green build the majority of the time. So this has been absolutely fantastic to see. And merging capability. So obviously we went into lockdown in March, and we only had 9 engineers at that point in time. So this was we had around about 1,000 merges per month, which equates to 100 per an engineer in a month. And that equates to about 5 merges to production per day for an engineer. So, you know, it's very rare that someone can get into production that often. So I think it's, you know, this is really working well for us. And when you do hear these excuses about the TDD slows me down and pairing slows me down, but I think, you know, the stats here are speaking for themselves, that all the TDD we're doing, all the processes we're putting in place, keeping the build speedy, is making us move extremely fast and with a lot of confidence. And also, yeah, no deploy Fridays. I think some people might have this still in place, but this isn't a concept in Fluidly. We always merge every day of the week. So we have no fear at all of merging at all. And this is some feedback that came in today from a user who's extremely happy with one of the features that was requested, and then we turned it around in a time that I guess they were quite surprised by. So yeah, again, this is resulting in happy customers, which we all want. In effect, that's what we should be striving for, is to deliver value every day. So yeah, for me, again, another massive win whenever we get something like this come through on Slack. But obviously, I've talked about sort of the virtues of a mono environment and how great it is, but I've sort of put a little question on Slack yesterday to sort of sum up in a sentence how it's been working on the mono environment, and these are all the responses that I got through. So yeah, you don't have to take it from me. This is other engineers who've sort of talked about how they feel. So yeah, like I guess that's it really from me. Thanks all for listening.
Thanks, Roland. Really interesting talk, and obviously really interesting to hear what you guys have been up to at Fluidly. We've got quite a few questions, so we'll get through those. So first off, we'll start with Andy. He says, does this approach rely on discrete, isolated features being developed rather than highly complex, interdependent changes of large epics? And he's also got a supplementary question of, do you employ the idea of pre-mortems at all?
Yeah, I think I've never really given much thought to the idea of sort of feature flags and sort of interconnected features. I mean, our system's extremely complicated. For the moment, we have been working a lot of this sort of more kind of segregated features, I would say, but there have been features that have been very heavily integrated in very complicated places. So this does work. I think even when you're trying to sort of iterate upon something, it's just that you kind of, you're building with in mind that, you want to feature flag new stuff that you don't want out yet. So it just tailors your whole approach, I think. Pre-mortems, yeah, I think someone's talked about this a few times. I think they do it. Someone talked about this in science or something. We don't apply here. I'm not sure how we would, but I'm pretty sure if you looked into it, you could. So yeah, it's a good idea. I might actually have a look into that tomorrow.
Alexandra asks, how you would you scale this at millions of users, or maybe a better starting question is, how many users do you have, and what type of companies would this be a bad idea for, do you think?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, in terms of like users at the moment, we're in the hundreds to 1,000 who are active on the platform. But I'm not entirely sure whether it should make a difference per se, in terms of, because what you're trying to effectively do is you're trying to discover problems before customers do. So if you've got all of your monitoring and alerting in place, then I'd like to think that you can basically roll back very, very quickly, so you don't lose or you don't anger too many people. Maybe there are situations where you might not want to apply this, as I said, like in large organizations that like oil tankers, in terms of like how they move, this is probably not a great idea. But if you're trying to bring up, like, say, a new microservice, this works quite well. But it's going to be different for everybody. I think, I've only done this once. I haven't done this in multiple places. So I haven't seen, that Shabir's been through multiple organizations trying to apply something, an idea, and this is the first time I've seen it in reality. So it's a learning experience still for me, I would say.
And your final two questions from the comments. So we've got, when did you decide to implement this strategy, and did you have a specialist QA team at the time? Yeah, so
on the QA side of things, we don't actually have any QAs. I mean, personally, from my perspective, I'm an ex-QA in Estet, and I really would love it if we did have a great manual tester or two on the team. I don't feel like we need an Estet, but good manual testing, I think, would be great in a situation like this. To be constantly testing production, exploratory testing, telling us where things don't work, and when we're feature flagging stuff, they can test in production rather than in a QA environment, and see how things behave for real. Sorry, and the other thing was, the other part of the question, I forgot.
So it was, when did you decide to implement this strategy?
Yeah, so actually, I wasn't in the company when it was being thought about. Actually, the CTO was talking to me on LinkedIn because I'd worked with him before, and he said, "Oh, I'm thinking about doing a mono environment." I said, "Yeah, I've heard about this. This sounds amazing, but it sounds, crazy as well. I'm not sure how this would work in practice and what it means." And all I remember him really, the point he was ramming home was you just need to have a very disciplined and good development team. And I think he's right. I think, you can't just be cavalier and put your cowboy hat on. You need to be constantly sort of evolving your processes and learning from your failures and stuff like that. So if you're not introspective, this is you'll fall flat on your face. And I think it was a risk that was worth taking. I mean, I'm not sure the conversations that went on in the background with the CTO about doing this, because we basically didn't build any new features for probably 3 months to 4 months. But once we got the environment up and running and serving customers, the CEO was absolutely amazed at how much more we were getting done. And all of these things she wanted to get done and had in her head were becoming a reality soon after. So yeah, it was 100% the right thing to do. Yeah, that's all I can say on that, really.
Okay. And final question before we go to the other two panelists, if they've got any questions to ask. It's from Adam. He says, do you have any form of knowledge capture to help new joiners get up to speed with the learnings from previous failures?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, I think with the remote working thing, one of the things about remote working is about document everything. And so with post-mortems as an example, that's documented in Confluence. So basically every single production outage or disaster is there for all to see and to learn from. And, we've got action points in those documents. So it's like, okay, right, we've got a timeline, we've got all the things went well, what went wrong, but what are we actually going to do about it? So that, yeah, everything's captured in terms of new joiners getting up to speed and learning from previous failures. But I'd honestly say the better thing to do for new joiners is to just make them pair all the time. Don't leave them on their own. And even when you're not a new starter at Fluidly, you're still pairing 90% of the time. It's just part of the culture. It's all about culture, I think. Okay.
So it's really good questions on the comments. We'll go to our speaker. So we'll start with Shabir. Do you have a question you'd like to ask Roland?
Yeah, I was wondering actually, how do you see this? Do you see this being sustainable as the product grows and becomes even more complex, serving even more customers and so forth? Do you see this approach as being sustainable throughout that growth as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the way that, it's the approach we've taken would take too long to explain in terms of the microservices and events and how we deal with them. But everything's segregated off. We could turn off one microservice if we wanted to and know that it's only going to affect one particular part of the app fairly confidently. So again, there's going to be things that you'll learn as you go along, but I think this scales. And Cashflow, the forecasting tool we feature flag and apply all this, is the most complicated product I've ever worked on since I can remember. It really is quite a beast, I would say.
Cool, nice.
And finally, we'll finish off with Mark. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask Roland?
Yeah, sure. So I was really interested at the top of your talk. You said it's not something you would do with brownfield, and I can see that. However, apart from maybe the obvious ones like TDD, are there any of these techniques you would recommend for a brownfield development?
Yeah, definitely monitoring and alerting, production testing. You can do that in any situation. And I think feature flagging, we were actually feature flagging on our previous monolith to a degree. So a lot of these things you can still do, but I think if you're going to go straight to production, then you need your CI to be up to scratch and fast and reliable and tell you a lot of information, i.e. your testing coverage is very, very good. That's the thing. That's the absolute. You cannot do this without that, basically.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Roland. Really, really interesting talk, and yeah, I'm sure the community will take a lot away from that. And obviously, it's a really interesting topic of discussion. And yeah, you'll have to let us know how that progresses fluidly. So finally, we've got Mark, who's up finally, who's going to give us his take on the agile transformations he's been involved in, and hopefully shed some light and tips on what he's been involved in within this field.
Sure. Okay. Just let me sort myself out here. Right. I'm going to stand up. I hope nobody minds. I can't sit down and present. It doesn't work for me. So hopefully you can see me okay. I should be in about the right position here. So yeah, culture eats porridge for breakfast. I'm Scottish, so I thought get something in there about porridge. You'll all have heard the Drucker statement, so I'm not going to repeat that for you. But this is all about how we can sustain behavioural change in agile transformation. So a little bit about me first. So this is me. I love the outdoors. I live in central Scotland. I've been renovating a 300-year-old farmhouse with my wife for the last 10 years. I have dogs. I'm a Scottish rugby fan. It's not the easiest job in the world. I love to cook, as you can probably tell. And these are some of the things that amuse me. My favourite film and something that makes me laugh. And I also do some Agile stuff. I got into Agile in 2005, and I've been coaching for over 10 years now. So I've been in and out of a fair number of organizations. The final thing is cardboard boxes. I'm surrounded with them. I've just moved house. So if you hear some echo, it's because I'm in a pretty empty room. So my apologies for that. And also another learning is don't agree to give a talk the week you move house. It's been rather frenetic. Anyway, moving on. What am I going to cover? What is organizational culture? Very briefly. This is only a 20-minute talk, but I'll give you a high level of what I think this is. Can we change it? That's a key thing to all of this. The benefits of porridge, naturally. Incentives and consensus are two of the things I'd like to focus on particularly. Nudge theory is something that I've been looking into recently, and it's something that I think leaders can benefit from in trying to implement behavioral change. And some of the things that leaders can do specifically and in this environment to help sustain the behavioral change. So, first up, what is Agile Transformation? I'm not a big fan of the Agile Transformation thing, because transformation for me implies this picture, a start state and an end state, whereas I think what we're trying to do with Agile companies or implementing change towards more agility in companies is we're actually changing the way the company changes. I thought about this myself this week in the lead up to this, and I came up with this, a shift in organizational culture to become an adaptive and a learning organization. So we're not changing a company from an X company to a Y company. We're helping a company, an organization, become more flexible, more adaptive, and become a learning organization. This is only my viewpoint. I'm sure some of you will have others, but I think that's the one I would go after. So, what's organizational culture, and can we change it? So, this is a model I first read up on about 7 years ago. It's by a couple called Deal and Kennedy. They wrote this paper in 1982 where they spoke about organizational culture, and they broke it down pretty easily to 4 quadrants. So the quadrants were based on whether the acceptable levels of risk a company has, and also the speed of feedback that a company has. So for example, high level of risk and a low speed of feedback is aircraft manufacturers and oil companies. These are all Dale and Kennedy's words. These are not mine. The idea being, if you're drilling for oil, if you get it right, you could really succeed. If you fail, you can get huge failure, and your speed of feedback is very, very low. Similarly, tough guy or macho companies, or tough guy or macho organizations rather, like the police, like surgeons, like sports people, they tend to be far faster feedback. If you get something wrong, you can see it immediately. But also the risks when you get that thing wrong are higher. What we tend to be doing, I think, in Agile Transformations is changing organizations which have low risk appetite and low speed of feedback. These tend to be banks, insurance companies, large old style organizations, if you like. We're trying to keep the low risk levels for them because that's imperative to their business, and move them to high feedback, high speed of feedback organizations. Work hard, play hard. Software companies do this. Roland's just given a perfect example of Fluidly. Very, very fast feedback on what they're doing. And low risk because of the amount of testing and all that sort of thing they do. So what we're trying to do is move large organizations more into that. So can we change culture? I don't actually think we can. However, what Dale and Kennedy also said was something that I really, really like, which is culture can be defined as the way we do things around here. And for me, that's something we can change. We can change the way we do things around here. What we're trying to do is change the companies from an old-fashioned, contract-based, waterfall-type system to a more iterative and incremental system of delivery. So we're shortening their feedback loops. And that way, we try to move the company to a more adaptive and learning way of working. So the challenge with that, there are many. Existing culture is always resistant to change. It's the way it is. And these examples are things that I've actually heard in various companies over the years. So, for example, the finance department saying, but we've already agreed the budget for the next 3 years. So how can you possibly make a change that results in something external to your company? And governance, detailed requirements need to be signed off before we can start development. So we can't move with more conversational user stories. We can't, we have to have a large delay before we actually start coding. Similarly, PMO, we have to have your milestones for the next 12 months before we can release any funding. I've genuinely heard all of these statements in other companies. But one of the things we really need to remember is it doesn't make these areas bad or unhelpful. It's simply currently the way we do things around here. This is their culture that they've been rewarded for potentially years, and we need to be quite aware of that. Behavioral changes are also hard, and interestingly, the reason I asked Shabir a question about time was because I knew what was coming here, because these are things I've heard. We're too busy to spend 2 hours on our retro, so we're only going to spend 30 minutes. That's people fighting almost the need to be a learning organization. I can't, and this was actually the same company, I can't possibly convey to the team what I want in 15 minutes, so we're moving our daily stand-up to 30 minutes. And this is all about culture pushing back on behaviors. User stories drift into becoming requirements with no associated conversations. No stakeholders attend the reviews, so we're writing RAG reports. So stakeholders aren't going to look at the work, they're expecting RAG reports. And I know Shabir mentioned reporting as well, and while some of it is useful, a lot of it is also waste. And finally, we have a tight deadline, so I'm just going to tell everybody what I need them to work on. That removes any kind of autonomy from both the teams and the personnel involved. And that's an impact on how your culture functions, how your people function. And the end result in this is the rubber band effect. I know many of you will have heard of this. You stretch the rubber band so far, but the minute you let go, it springs back. And the point is, how can we get around this? And the only way we can get around this effectively is by support and the reinforcement of behavioral changes that will enable us to shift the culture. We need to constantly say, we need to keep these behaviors in line. We need to keep presenting the same behaviors, because if we don't, the rubber band will snap straight back the minute we stop reinforcing them. So, how can we do this? This is the porridge bit. So, this lady here is my grandmother, and she was involved in a study done by Edinburgh University when she was in her late 80s, clearly not this picture, on how she remained so fit and well into her late life. I can't honestly tell you what the university ended up saying, but what my grandma always used to say was, it's because she ate a bowl of porridge every single day. Not once a week, not once in a while. She ate a bowl of porridge every single day. There's obviously a question around, did the porridge actually help? But the truth is, if she hadn't eaten it, would we have known? We can't tell. But it's that repetition and that reinforcement that we have to think about when we're looking at behavioral change. It has to be constant. It has to be repetitive. And here's the key to it. It's not me, it's you. I would obviously say these things. I'm an Agile coach. But to be truly effective, these messages need to come from leadership. The leadership of an organization at all levels has to reinforce these behaviors. And I'm going to talk through just a wee bit on maybe some things we can do to help with that. So there's another model that I really like. This is the Lippitt-Noster model for managing complex change. This was introduced to me by another coach, a chap called Mark Kennedy, actually, who may even be on the call. If he is, give me a wave. But I think this is an excellent model for talking about change. And what Lippitt-Noster said was that if we have vision and consensus and skills and resources and incentives and an action plan all in place, we'll get a change. If we lack vision, then we're going to get confusion. People won't know what they're aiming at. If we lack consensus, we'll get sabotage. And consensus on this front means they're talking about an agreement on values, ideas, purpose, gaining skills together, expertise together. It's feeling like we're one team. If they don't have the skills, people will be anxious. They'll feel they're being asked to do something that they don't believe they can do. If they don't have the resources, they'll get frustrated. And by resources, that's not just people. That could be whiteboards. That could be the right software. That could be the right development environment. And without them, the people will see what they can do, but won't be able to actually achieve it. Incentives, people need to be incentivized. People will automatically ask, what's in it for me? And we need to make sure that people can see, team members can see what's in it for them when we're going through some kind of change. And finally, an action plan. If we don't have an action plan, if we don't have a view of where we're going by when, we'll simply hit a treadmill and we'll go around in circles. So the reason I highlighted consensus and incentives there in blue is because I'm going to extrapolate them just a little bit more. The others, we simply don't have time to go over it. So incentives, one of the great things, the reason I've thrown this up is that most people, when I say incentives, think about cash, giving people pay rises. And while they are incentives, they're very low level and short-term incentives. I love what I do. And I do a little bit of pro bono work, but I wouldn't be doing my job for free. However, that's not necessarily what incentivizes people. So this guy, Dan Pink, some of you may have heard of, came up with, wrote a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And what he said was, there are three things that motivate us. Autonomy, so being able to control your own destiny, control what you're working on. Mastery, getting better at things. People really enjoy getting better at things. Think about somebody who plays golf on their own to lower their handicap, or somebody who learns an instrument. They're not going to make money out of it, but the mastery of those things is something that motivates people. And also purpose, having a sense of direction, a sense of purpose in what they're doing. And that even applies for development teams. Roland mentioned how he was getting great customer feedback. That's purpose, driving something for the customers. And what Dan Pink says is when you get all these three things together, you hit drive, and that's a real sweet spot in the middle. And leadership has the ability to set that autonomy, that mastery, and that purpose, and that gives people the incentives that they need to do good work. So nudge theory is very interesting. It's something I've been reading about recently. The description at the top is my own paraphrasing from what I've read about it. It's been popular since the mid-90s, I think, but was made particularly popular in 2008 by a book that I can't even remember the author's name at the moment. But basically, it's small changes to the environment to encourage people rather than mandate them to change their behaviors. So, for example, and here's two great examples that you can Google. My London friends will love the one on the left. Footprints. You stand on the right and you walk on the left. Strangely, after living 6 years in London, it still winds me up in Edinburgh. People don't do that. So maybe we should start introducing these footprints up here. The other one is ashtrays. But who's the best player in the world? On the left hand, Ronaldo, on the right hand, Messi. And it's encouraging people to stub their cigarettes out. Can we do similar things? Can leadership use nudge theory for consensus? And I actually think they can. And I think this is one of the keys. So what I see a lot is leadership having, say, a meeting in an office, or writing a report for their senior people, or indeed demanding a report of their junior people. But what if they were just to display some of the behaviors we're asking somebody else? We do this too. We're all in this together. Hold stand-ups. If you're a leadership team, hold a stand-up. Apart from the fact that I think they're of huge value, it will help your staff see and your team see that you're all doing the same thing. Hold retros. Prove that we're all in a learning organization and leadership wants to learn too. Go to the Gemba. Go to the place where the work is done. The reason there's a picture of a gun there is that I believe the Japanese police force refer to the crime scene as the Gemba, the real place, the place where the work is done. Go and see the work rather than asking for a report to come in. And that will eventually support the behaviors that you're trying to implement. And do it regularly. Remember the porridge. You have to do it regularly. I saw in a recent organization where the leaders attended one stand-up a month. That's not regularly. You have to be seen to be doing these things. You can nudge by asking the right questions. So, can I have the number? I'm going to pop along to each team's daily stand-up. That will encourage teams to know that the leaders value stand-ups. How did your retro go? Did you manage to squeeze everything into the 2 hours? What about asking these questions? And similarly, my favorite one, I don't know, what do you think? Even when you do know, help people to understand they are being empowered, because that's not easy for people. One of the problems we have is that these things are difficult in the new normal. How many people's meetings look like this nowadays? I know mine do. And it makes demonstrating behaviors even more difficult. So how about have a think about inviting team members to listen in on your stand-ups? I'm not suggesting you invite everybody. That would just be crazy, but invite a couple of people, and then a few days later invite a couple of other people. We have to work harder at demonstrating behaviors when we're in this environment. And asking team members to facilitate a retro. What about that? Ask one of your team members to facilitate a retro for your leadership team. What stronger display could you have that you're encouraging a learning environment for your whole organization? Bottom line is the goal's achievable. If we change behaviours and sustain the changes, we can turn the tanker and change the culture. The culture will change anyway as the behaviours are reinforced. Don't forget the porridge. Okay. Any questions? Hello.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Sorry about the delay.
No, that's all right. You did that.
I'll just pass on to Roland first. Do you have any questions for Mark that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I got a couple of notes here actually. So you mentioned about people saying, "Oh, I don't have 2 hours to spend on the retro." I wonder if it's due to the fact that people sometimes don't see the value. Like I've been in organizations where retros are just big sessions of complaining, but then nothing actually concrete actually happens as an action. And is this the perception when people are saying things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Scottish word for crying is greeting, and we have a phrase up here that retros turn into a greeting meeting. And basically, you're absolutely correct. They need to be well facilitated, and they need to be encouraged. I think if you can't have an achievable task come out of your retro, then something's wrong. But only 1 or 2 per sprint or short period of time. Otherwise, you end up not going after them. I would recommend maybe a couple of achievable targets for change coming out of every retro, even if that's going for a pizza together or having a virtual coffee, as Shabir mentioned, you know? Yeah.
And just one thing that was really interesting was you mentioned team members facilitating a retro for leadership.
Yeah.
So you've seen that actually happen, is it?
I did in one organisation, yeah. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but yeah, they did. They brought it in. I think it only happened once, but I think that was due to the leadership backing off having retros rather than the event itself. But the great publicity from team members, they just thought it was fantastic that the leaders were inviting them into the fold and mimicking those behaviours.
It's really interesting. I might actually talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Great stuff.
Shabir, do you have a question to ask to Mark?
Yeah, one of the things I think you said right near the beginning was just around getting your leadership teams to understand this isn't a finite journey. There isn't an end state, and it's a continuous thing. And obviously, you mentioned around the kind of repetition and the nudges and so forth. But is there any tips and tricks you could give right at the beginning? Because quite often a leadership team might see this as a fixed time, fixed budget, or the scope type of program. And that's often the challenge. Like they've got a very clear plan already predetermined in their head. Any tips and tricks around how to get over that?
Wow, that's a good one. Thanks for that.
Because I've seen it.
Yeah, so I think it's about helping the leaders understand that what they're looking for is adaptability and learning rather than an end state where they have small teams working in sprints. That doesn't benefit anybody. It's the ability. I think one of the challenges is that the leadership frequently looks for a manual on Agile, and it's reminding them that as much as I'm trying really hard not to say the word mindset, but it kind of is. It's a way of changing the culture. So. And if you can get them to understand that early, well, tell me how you did it, please.
I haven't. I think it is. I think it's very much kind of stuff like you've said. It's that continuous journey and really continuous reminding them with the behaviors, repetition, nudges, and everything that you've said. I don't think there's any answer to just do this one thing at the beginning and you've change their mindset. I don't think there is.
So the number of times I hear or I see leadership basically displaying values where they're saying teams over there, they're doing agile, we're not, or we want everybody else to change, but we don't have to. One of the challenges that you have, particularly in large organizations, is that almost none of the leadership have got to the place they are now by exhibiting the kind of behaviors we're suggesting to them. They've got to their senior places by meeting project deadlines, writing good reports, commanding people, command and control, that kind of thing. So that's difficult because you have to find for them what's in it for them too, right?
Yeah, I think just like to share actually one way that I did manage to get by in a certain situation was actually kind of siloing and ring fencing an area off and just trying to work in a very agile manner there, and proving the success over there to the leadership team, so they can actually visibly see we've made these changes, this is what the impact has been, this is the success that it's brought it to the teams, and that's why we would like to essentially do that on a wider scale, and that's the kind of culture environment that we really want to bring to the rest of the company as well. I've definitely had one scenario where we've managed to do that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to say, just before we finish, just got a few questions from the audience. So Helen asks maybe a slightly broad question for you to answer here, but where do you start with culture change?
So I think this is the point. I don't actually think you can change culture. I think you can change behaviors, and culture will change itself. So where I would start with culture change is by saying, let's put a small team together rather than a big team of testers, a big team of developers, and a big team of analysts. Let's put one small team together and just prove that the model works. And there's nothing I've seen drive success better than success. If you put one single team together and you start successfully producing value for the customer, that will begin to shift how people think about producing that value for the customer, and culture will change as a result. Sorry, that was a bit more long-winded than I expected.
And we've got another question from Andy. He says, you spoke a great deal about the change in the way things are done, but not really mentioning how people think about what they do. How does the thinking element come into play?
I don't know that I understand the question, sorry. The thinking element of people in teams. I'm gonna talk about that because I'm really not sure, Andy, but if you can contact me through this and elaborate, I'm happy to answer a different question if I'm on the wrong tack. In terms of how people think about delivering their work, that is difficult. If you can get people who are at least willing to attempt a change, it's kind of back to success. It's back to this the mastery side of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If suddenly you've got a small team of people delivering something where they would normally take months and months to deliver anything of value, that learning that they get from that can really encourage them to do more of it. And that's what I've seen. Sometimes you're having to just beg them to go with you for a little while, but if you can then suddenly be successful, that drives it, and that then becomes something that you can expand on. I hope that helps, Andy, but feel free to try and get in touch after this.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time out on a Thursday to watch our three speakers, and I'd like to say big thank you to Shabir, Roland, and Mark, who's helped us navigate through this very complex topic of agile transformations. And I'm sure we could spend hours upon hours talking about agile transformations, but we hope that we've we've managed to shed some insight, and at the end of the day, we're just hoping that we've provided some value. So yeah, big thank you to all three of you for agreeing to talk to us, and keep your eyes peeled for the next Agile event, and we'll be focusing on the delivery function and the evolution of the delivery function. So looking forward to that next month. But from me, a big thank you, and again a big thank you to all our speakers. And I hope you have an amazing evening and enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Awesome. Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Cheers.